Thanks for tuning in to the HR Uprising podcast. I'm your host, Lucinda. The HR Uprising is focused on helping forward-thinking people professionals deliver real lasting value in their organisations. I'm a chartered psychologist, speaker and trainer, and recently authored the best-selling business book, How to Be a Change Superhero. My day job is founder and CEO of software and training business Actus. This gives me the opportunity to work with other businesses like yours. We are focused on building a better workplace for people wherever they are located, with the help of our performance, learning and talent management software and our training and consultancy services. Every week on the podcast, I will be covering different topics and challenges, joined by relevant experts and real-life people professionals. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really hope you enjoy and get value from this week's episode. Hello and welcome to this week's HR Uprising podcast. And we're leaning now into the topic of culture. And I'm delighted to have Bonnell with me today of Milo HR, who's going to explain how we can create a winning talent culture or acquisition strategy. And we're going to focus in on SMEs because I know that many of our listeners are that HR department of one. That's not to say it's not appropriate for those of you who work in larger organisations, but we thought we'd give a little bit of extra focus on the smaller businesses today. So, Miles, thank you so much for joining today. Would you like to give a bit of an introduction to yourself and your background?
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me. So I am founder of Milo HR, current head of talent for Diverium, and I've been in talent leadership roles now for the last 10 plus years. And that's ranged from kind of healthcare sector to kind of global giants, Amazon, Tesco. So I guess my real niche where I've honed my skills in over the past few years is specializing on kind of fixing talent acquisition departments or creating really cool strategies for them. So that's kind of me and my niche.
And it is really good to have a niche, isn't it, in terms of people understanding how to get how you can help them best. And I guess just before we kind of go into, I guess this might leap ahead into where we're going with this. When you say fixing problems that people have, would I be leaping ahead to say what's a typical problem?
Yeah, so it could be a number of things really. So it could be, I guess a big one at the moment is technology. So technology in talent acquisition. It doesn't matter if what you had 5 years ago worked then. 5 years is a lot. Is a mass amount of time when it comes to technology. So keeping up with technological advances, using new smart technologies, automating technologies, AI being the buzzword at the moment, to try and kind of integrate that into your talent acquisition process. I think that's a big thing that I tend to focus on. Looking at people's employer branding, because in terms of how you brand yourself to the external market, again, that changes as new leaders come in and out of the business. So it could be anything technology related, EVP related, or just operationally, it might be that a business is going through a mass amount of growth, which means their TA strategy needs to then adapt to the growth that they're going through. So it could be a number of things, but it's not necessarily that something's broken as such, but maybe something just needs tweaking because businesses change all the time.
So it is something you've got to be right up to the moment with and always sort of thinking about keeping it fresh in terms of moving things through.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So if we sort of, when we discussed this as a plan, we thought we'd try and give it a sort of a high level end-to-end approach, didn't we? So how do you want to structure this and where should we start, Miles?
So I think for me, it's funny because we talk about recruitment as this kind of operational process, and a lot of people that I speak to when it comes to recruitment think of the beginning step being the point of an applicant applying for a role, whereas for me, it actually starts for a bit before that, and it all comes back to what the business is actually doing themselves. So for me, I think the foundation for a good recruitment process is looking at what's happening in-house with your teams in terms of the culture, how you're retaining your staff, how your employees feel, and for me, that's the beginning of any recruitment process. It's mapping out how your business is working and making sure that what you're selling to your candidates is exactly what they're getting.
So the key thing here is about alignment of the actual culture. Is it, or are there ever situations where you might sell a different culture to what you have, or because you want to change the culture? When might you not align?
Yeah, I've been in positions like that before where, a business will have kind of mapped out what their values are, and on a piece of paper it says one thing, and actually, the business is in flames, and people, you've got high turnover rates, and it's not really reflective of what you're selling into candidates. So I think there needs to be that synergy with recruitment and ops to actually make sure that there's this transparency and honesty with candidates that you're bringing in, to say, look, this is where we're trying to get to, but this is where we're at the moment. So, I mean, whilst it's all well and good me saying, get your house in order, that's not something that's going to happen overnight. But I think making sure that you're on the right road to get to where you want to be, I think is important. And then taking the candidates on the journey as the applications start to trickle through. I think that's the best way to map out a solid recruitment process. And it also, and we'll come on to this in a moment, I'm sure, but it also kind of feeds into those KPIs that measure what a good talent acquisition team looks like. For example, turnover within a 12-month period. If you're going to be bringing people in and you've sold them something that it's not, then they're obviously going to leave quite quickly. So yeah, starting with the basics and making sure you've mapped out the culture prior to actually advertising. Yeah, for me, it's the first point of call before you start any recruitment process.
No, it makes a lot of sense. And being aware about, so I like the point you're saying, so actually being honest with yourself. So if whatever you've done previously, if you're having high turnover in that first 12 months period, then something is disconnecting between your messaging and the lived experience of a candidate within that 12 months. And it may be culture, it may be, well, I suppose even the way they're managed is also cultural, actually. So that's really key. And I was just thinking there, of course, it does make sense to be honest, because if you paint a business to be the best thing since sliced bread and it's all a really smooth operating organization, and they get in and it's kind of seat of the pants, that's a different person. There are different candidates who will thrive in each of those environments. There are some people, if you go, actually, this is a real challenge, we want someone who's going to come in and help us form the culture we want, you'll get somebody who is going to help you on that journey. So it does make sense to be honest in terms of where you're aspiring to go to, isn't it, if you're not quite there?
Yeah, and I think, again, it comes down to that piece where I think some people are almost afraid of scaring people off when it comes to the recruitment process. But you're 100% right, that different candidates align to different types of roles. And if you know that your culture isn't exactly where it needs to be, then you need to find someone that's going to come in and help change that culture. And we were talking before the podcast about culture, and I think for me the culture is the tone is kind of set at board level, but then that needs to really trickle down and embed within the teams in terms of really setting the tone for the business, and hiring leaders that will be able to come into the business and support with any change of culture. I think it's really important, and that transparency at recruitment, when you are hiring these kind of leaders into the business, is really important.
Yeah, great. Okay, so we've got this sort of solid foundation. We've thought about our culture, thought about our brand perception. What are we going to do next?
So once you've kind of, and I like that part, that start to recruitment, because that's where that there's that overlap between generalist HR and talent acquisition. So that's where the two departments really work well together in terms of figuring out what the culture is, and obviously working with the wider ops teams, and then being able to put that into a tangible message to then advertise. And that's when you would start looking at what the business really needs, to really assessing what the current need is and then what the future need is, to then really set a strategy and set a tone as to what's going to work well for the business. Because if I came into a business as a TA leader and they said, look, we just need things fixing, so how it's currently working is going to work as efficiently as possible, my strategy would be very different to a business that said we're going to double in size in the next 2 years, because that high growth and the strategy that would be put in place would allow for that growth. So I think understanding what the actual need is before setting the strategy out is really important, and then that all kind of comes back around to looking at the budgets. What kind of money you'd be working with in terms of systems implementation, what your purchasing power would be, and then coming straight back to the basics and mapping out what roles you'll be recruiting within any given period, and getting the job descriptions right. And this comes back to that messaging piece around, the job description sets a scene for what the culture is like. And then what recruitment will do is that we'll use that job description to then create some really powerful adverts to reach out to candidates and to reach the market.
Right. And so, I was interested, actually. I was going to ask the whole thing about job descriptions or role profiles. Do they still exist as they used to, if you know what I mean? Is that something you were talking about, how things change over time? Obviously, you do need to be clear about what you're recruiting for, but I wonder whether they are the same as the traditional job description that you might have had 20 years ago.
Yeah, that's it. Funny, I had a conversation the other day with my current business about job descriptions, and I mean, a lot of them hadn't been updated for quite a few years. So I personally believe that what's in the job description needs to be 100%. It needs to relate to the role, and it needs to really outline what they'll be doing on a day-to-day. But at the same time, because everyone's role evolves slightly, so let's take a nurse, for example. Their role will potentially evolve as kind of years go on, but the basics of what they will do will remain. So I think being concise with the data that's in a job description is important, but making it too exhaustive can have a negative effect. And I guess the real role of a job description is for recruitment. We'll use it to create an advert, but the real role of a job description is so that the candidate can understand exactly what good looks like for their role, what they're measured against in terms of the kind of performance indicators. And it's really a tool for HR to be able to, and their managers to use and sit down with them when they have their kind of annual appraisals and okay, so what did you do well this year against your job description? And if that job description isn't up to date, and your expectations of the individual sit outside that job description, it's a clear indicator that it needs to be updated. But I think for me, shorter is better when it comes to job descriptions.
Yeah, and that's one of the things, I suppose, that as you say, it's about people having clarity, but things evolve over time. And I was thinking, if you are very exhaustive, certainly some environments, then people become a little bit more dogmatic. And actually, in lots of organisations, particularly if we're talking SMEs here, you need people who are prepared to do what needs to be done within the business, within the realms. And so you need to have a little bit of, I guess, openness or ambiguity to that job description. Know what the core things are, but also to be able to deliver other aspects.
Yes, 100%.
I mean, I don't know whether this is going into where we're going to talk next about in terms of advertising and things like that. I did wonder, I was thinking, would this be about skill planning? This might be about maybe a resource planning, about in large organisations where you've got to do sort of resource planning. Is this where this sits, where you're lining this up with a combination of your budget and your gaps and your growth? Is that also where this part sits, or would that sit later?
Yes, I'd say so. And I think there needs, when it comes back to job descriptions, I think you need to create the job descriptions and almost group them based on transferable skill sets, so that when it comes to resource planning, you can identify people that could potentially move internally into roles. And funnily enough, when we come to talk about actually advertising the role, internal would be obviously the first point of call. Before you go external, you should be asking the wider business, look, we've got this role, is anyone in your team suitable for it? Could there be a sideways move or an upward move where we can actually gain that gain that move that experience in-house and really capitalize on it.
I mean, that's fascinating. We are totally going into probably larger businesses there, but again, it reminds me of businesses that I've worked in and with, how poorly done that is quite often. And it's an opportunity to retain people. People often feel they have to leave a business and often return in order to get that progress that they need. So I suspect that half the problem is having that visibility of those transferable skills, isn't it? Defining them.
Oh, 100%. I mean, we had massive teams. I mean, Amazon's, I'm not even going to talk about Amazon with this, because they had teams the size of SME businesses that would solely, focus on workforce planning. But I mean, even going back to when I was at Tesco, we would do exactly that. There would be a team that would focus on different business areas, and then be able to then share that knowledge across the wider business to see who our high performers were, and see if we could support them with their growth across wider business areas. So in bigger businesses, that's how it works. And I mean, in a lot of SMEs, when I'll go into these businesses, they don't even have one person that would actually look after that or look at it. They'd have the standards layout is, talent acquisition, learning and development, generalist HR, and then each of those department, resource planning, and there's no real ownership between any three of the kind of core departments. So I think it is down to talent acquisition to really get the word out there and be able to effectively advertise those roles internally, because I think a lot of the problems that smaller businesses have is, like you said, there's just no visibility of these roles. So even if you go, okay, you take ownership of your own career opportunities here, and we'll leave it to you to apply for roles. If they don't know where they're applying or what the roles are, then how are you supposed to take ownership of your own career within a business? So yeah, 100%. It's visibility. I think especially for SMEs is going to be the important thing.
Yeah, and I think maybe you have to flip it. And there may be people out here who say we're stating the obvious here, but to a certain extent, there's a bit of a light bulb for me. So, so I've worked in large organisations. In fact, last week I worked for Siemens, and Siemens is, although it's got a larger organisation and it's quite talent, it will have all the people, as you've described in the businesses you've talked to in terms of talent development internal. The reality is, because it's a business of quite a lot of acquisitions. And I mean, you could look at, I don't know, the NHS like that. You could look at lots of organisations. They're still siloed. So big businesses can still be siloed. So even though you have transferable skills in one silo, the chances of getting moved into another one, it's not all, it's not maximised. And I think technology could well be the way there in terms of getting better job families and transferable skills there. But SMEs, which is, I suppose, our key focus here. For me, this feels like it is really important to empower the individual and also put a bit of responsibility on the line manager about almost how do you do it bottom up. So saying, you've got these skills here, where might you want to go in the business? And it's about working flexibly with the individual and thinking about what career pathway could they map out, and almost doing it organically, because you're not necessarily going to have those jobs. And it's about being in touch with the individual's skills and aspirations, but also understanding where the pain points are for that small business. And you may end up just developing roles, or you talk about career pathways that kind of go up as opposed to the top down type approach. I'm sure that's a whole other episode, isn't it? But and I think but without digressing too much, there's some really cool technologies I've been working with over the past few months, where actually artificial intelligence can kind of capture that core data from a role, move that job description completely out of the way, and then match it against a different role with the right transferable skills and the skill sets that role would need. So it almost disregards your job title and drags across the transferable skills that role, the job description that's been written for it requires. So it allows people to, there is definitely cool technologies that are being developed at the moment that allow for that to happen, and that transfer of skills within the business to happen without having to think too hard about it. So it's massively interesting topic, and we could probably talk about it all day, but so I think it's definitely it's interesting also though to talk practically about AI in that. We're not going to go off into the AI, but that's I like it when you hear a specific tangible example. That makes sense to me, the use of AI. And I think you've also got AI in the next area, haven't you, when you're talking about building adverts?
Yeah, so, and I mean, AI could, I mean, I think it is going to be a reoccurring topic, and I think AI is going to, for me, I think there's a lack of knowledge around AI at the moment, and actually what it is. It's often mistaken for a piece of software that's just a bit clever. But I think with talent acquisition, it seems to be, from my own experience, that AI is really supporting with automation around how candidates apply, how businesses can deliver talent acquisition. And if we talk about the EVP of a business, for example,
that's the value proposition.
Yeah, that's it. Employee value proposition. So how you advertise your internal brand to the outside market. I mean, it's helped me personally. So I myself, I'm quite heavily dyslexic, and so for me, actually verbalizing what's in my head comes very easy, but putting it down on paper is a nightmare for me, because it's hell. So if I talk into my phone and tell artificial intelligence exactly what I want to put down on paper, and when it comes to, I don't know, an advert or writing a careers website, artificial intelligence will do that all for me. It will take my words and it will put it into a tangible, readable sentence that actually sounds good, so that the wider business can use it. So for me, things like ChatGPT or other technologies that could do similar things, Bard, for example, or any others, would be able to do that for me. And I think it's a really important tool that talent acquisition can definitely lean on to be able to create some really cool content. And there is a bit of danger behind it as well, because obviously we don't want to get to the point where everything looks the same and feels the same and is generic. So you do need, it's not a case of, ask ChatGPT to write your EVP for you, because it's just not going to work. There needs to be that personal touch. And if you are leaning on AI to support you with writing an EVP or doing any of that, it needs proofing, 2 or 3 times after you receive it. But I do think that there is a place for using it, especially for me. Like I said, I'm a very specific example there, but I've used it and it's helped me a lot.
Yeah.
So then if we continue with EVP, so, when it comes to, turning that button on, and, you've set your stall up and you've gone internally to see if there's any candidates there. When you're creating a talent strategy, what you really need to be doing is thinking, right, okay, so I know what our brand is at the moment. I know where it wants to be. Let's capture that and really sell an honest picture to our candidates, so that we can match the right candidates, the right people to our business. And I think that honesty piece is crucial here. So, and I think for me as well, that communication goes a bit further than just the website. It's every piece of communication you send through to the candidate is as part of their interview process. If for me, I mean, the big thing for me when it comes to communication as well is, if I don't hear, as if I put the shoe on the other foot, if I'm a candidate and I don't hear back from a recruitment process that I've been through, that is I don't think I would ever reapply there again. It just, for me, leaves a bitter taste in my mouth. And there's been some really interesting studies to say that actually, and I don't have the stats off the top of my head, but that if you don't hear back from an interview process and you get ghosted, that you're more likely to not apply there again, but you're also more likely not to recommend that company to any of your friends and family. So the damage that the communication as part of your EVP can make can be brutal.
Yes, and depending on what the brand is of that business, can be really multiplied, can't it, in terms of it's a consumer brand. What about things like diversity and inclusion, that shows, again, larger organizations can have metrics and ways of attacking that sort of thing. How can you make sure that your recruitment process isn't biased in this sort of area?
Yeah, so I mean, again, you can there's a load of tools out there that you can use. So we're starting with the basics here. So there's loads of tools out there that you can use to actually make sure that your adverts have been screened to make sure that there's no bias in them in terms of the wording of the adverts, in terms of the messaging. So if you're using overly masculine words, it can pick up on that, so that you can make it you know a diverse advert, so that it attracts people from all backgrounds. So there's a number of things you can do with your adverts to make sure that the adverts themselves and the messaging is diverse. And I think it's funny because when it comes to kind of data collection, and we'll come on to the ATS piece and technology in a bit, but when it comes to actually collecting that data as well and using it, whilst equality and diversity, or diversity and inclusion, or equity and diversity, however you want to shape it for your business, is extremely important. And more often than not, it's generalist HR that will use that data from their internal employees, and and that's where projects will usually start. I think it's really important piece of work that actually starts at recruitment, in terms of how you advertise, and how that data from your applications is then distributed internally. The actual interviews, how diverse is your interview panel when you're interviewing? I mean, back when I was, and I'm not going to name the company, but you might guess it, but in one of my previous companies, we had one of the departments feeding back saying, yes, we're a really diverse department here. We've got 50% male, 50% female, and then it turns out, after kind of doing a bit of due diligence and digging into the data, that yes, they were 50% male, 50% female within that department. And it's a very large department in not in the UK, it was a European country, but the split was 50-50, with 50% of the males being leaders or senior leaders, and all of the junior staff that were coming in being female. So that 50-50 sounded great on paper, and it was easy for them to really shout about it. But when you actually dig down into the information, you could see that there was a massive split. So kind of driving back from that, I then did this massive piece of work to go, okay, so how are we gonna get this changed? How are we going to actually move some of these female workers into more leadership roles, and kind of distribute that divide? And what we did in the end was we brought people in from other areas of the business, other females in from other areas of the business, in leadership positions, to do interviews, so be on the interview panel and represent females, because there was no one there within that department that could represent and it turned out that the minority was the female in this relationship. So and it was great, because over time, over a 6-month period, you could see that we were starting to become a bit more inclusive with how we were hiring the leadership positions, and it worked. But I think when it comes to being a diverse employer, you need to be very you need to be conscious about the stats that you're collecting, how they're being distributed, and how you can impact that as a talent acquisition team.
Yeah, so there's so much to think of, again, isn't it? And this balance again, we keep going large company and then small company, and I guess in a small business, you've just got to make sure you're not biased. I guess you've just got to be aware, haven't you? Because you've still got to recruit the best person for the job. And so that takes us into the practicalities now, doesn't it, of actually sourcing the candidates, which again, when you haven't got a talent acquisition team in a smaller business, it's time consuming. So what would you say, what if we kind of, over the next sort of 10 minutes or so, let's focus in on the sort of bringing that candidate in and what we need to do next?
Yes, definitely. So you got your EVP, you've got your careers site up and running, you've got your adverts written. So this is where you would rely heavily on your applicant tracking system to kind of push adverts out there. And I see an applicant tracking system as more than just a kind of database that candidates come through. I see it as an automation tool. So when you look at SMEs as as a business, you really want the biggest return on investment for your talent from your talent acquisition team. And the best way to get good return on investment is setting your systems up to automate as much work as possible.
Yeah.
So again, I'll give you another example of a business. This one's an SME that I went into, where they had an applicant tracking system. However, the applicant tracking system wasn't set up effectively, and their onboarding process as well sat separate to their general recruitment process and was very much heavily paper based. So I went into the business, reviewed everything, did my audit, and it turned out that we had 2 full-time administrators doing the work of what the applicant tracking system, the ATS could do for them. So in the space of 6 months, I effectively made 2 people redundant through using an ATS properly, because it completely removed all the paper-based processes, all the meetings that they were having, and automated it all through effectively using your system properly. I'm happy to say that they weren't made redundant from the business, but we reutilized their skills elsewhere in HR, and we gained 2 extra headcount that could be used for projects.
Much more valuable. Less
and I mean, but both of the people in those roles, I mean, I don't think they had much job satisfaction from what they were doing, because they were just coming in and going through the motions. And their new roles that were created off the back of that, they were so, you could see that their eyes were lighting up with the new projects that they were taking on, and the new work that they were doing. So I think setting up your ATS is going to be the key thing to make sure that you get the best return on investment from your talent acquisition teams.
What would be the sort of quick things that you'd say, have you set up properly? Because certainly, having used ATS ourselves, I know you can get inundated with hundreds of candidates. So there's still a level of sort of sifting. So what can you do to set something up effectively and to make this less painful when you have got limited resource?
Yeah, definitely. So I think even going one step before that is, if you choose the right ATS that's for you, I think is the most important thing. Because if you were to go for, I don't know, a large provider, a large ATS provider, whilst it looks nice and shiny, they're the biggest, so they've got to be the best, it's not necessarily the space. It's not necessarily the best thing for an SME, because they aren't as customizable and user friendly when it comes to changing and tweaking things to suit your needs. Right. And you'll find that if you were to go for a smaller ATS, they're a lot more hands-on with delivering their customer service, and you usually have an account manager at the end of the phone. Whereas these big providers, you actually have to hire an ATS expert in-house just to make changes in the system. Yeah, and you'll see these adverts everywhere, Workday specialist, iTrent specialist, whatever the bigger ones are. Whereas the small ones, all of that support sits in-house, and they will customize a system to what you need it to do. So I think that's really important, making the right choice. And I've got no affiliations, whatever the best ATS pitch is for you, I think go for it. But just make sure that
it's small and customizable, and look for customer service, as opposed to large generic. No one ever got fired for getting, but actually it's probably not a good shout in this situation.
No, not at all. So yeah, 100%. And then when it comes to your biggest quick wins, your account manager can support you with this, because they'll be working for you as opposed to the bigger ATSs. But I think automating your messaging, getting that messaging right, will save a lot of time. So we talked about ghosting before. You can set your ATS up to make sure that every single person gets a response at every single stage, and then no one will ever get ghosted. So it's such a simple thing to do through your applicant tracking system, and it means that you're not sending manual emails out. And then you can go one step further, and actually all the ATSs have moved forward with the technology, but linking them in with your Outlook calendars. That way you can, if you want to book an interview in, it goes directly into a calendar, so you're not having to set a diary invite up and a Teams meeting or Zoom or whatever it might be. So you automate that very easily for your ATS. standardized reporting that gets sent out automatically to the business, so you're not having to build reports manually, and in terms of tracking, vacancy numbers, turnover figures, all the rest of it. You can create some really cool reports that are sent out to leadership teams automatically from your ATS. And yeah, so there's a number of things that you can do really, and I think the obvious thing, I haven't even touched on it, is creating templates for everything. So it might take you an extra bit of time to create a template for a role and add the advert and the job description and everything. But once you've created that template in a lot of ATSs, you can then just go back to it and reuse it, so you're not having to post a job from scratch. There's loads of ways you can automate. And then with a lot of ATSs, especially the smaller ones, they will have multi-posting tools as well. So when you come to post an advert, it posts to all of your preferred job sites that you would want to post to. And again, it means that you're not having to go around each job site and post manually an advert on Indeed and Read and Total Jobs. It all comes from your ATS, adverts distributed, click of a button, and you don't have to do anything about it.
That's really interesting. Actually, I didn't realise that they did it as much as that in terms of applicant tracking systems. So that's a really helpful insight. I suppose then keeping flowing through. So you're talking about posting on job boards and things like that. Where do you think, again, as SMEs, we don't have large amounts of money to go and use a headhunter to go out and recruit somebody. This is all being done manually, possibly by someone internally. What's the most cost effective? What's most up to date now in terms of getting talent?
Yeah, I think the obvious one. So you've got a load of different kind of aggregated. I think your main job boards will be your Read, your Total Job. I'll come on to Indeed in a second, but that's an obvious one. But a lot of these job boards, you have to have some kind of annual subscription with them, or you can buy one-off postings, but they are quite expensive, and they're probably not going to want me to hear me say that, but they are expensive in terms of the return on investment. So when you are buying job slots and you're investing money with these different job boards, you really need to make sure that you get that return on investment, and you can only really get that return on investment if you've trialed them. A lot of them will offer a trial, so you could do a 3-month trial and see if you actually hire anyone through those job boards. But I think making sure that your TA team track that return on investment is the number one most important thing when spending money in TA. Now, Indeed's different because you don't need to spend money on Indeed. And if you want your best bang for your buck, advertise on Indeed. It'll probably find your advert for you anyway and scrape it and put it on there.
Oh, really? Is that how it works?
Yeah, so it's really cool. So that it's an organic job scraping tool, and it will use the internet, and it will use your own local job board to collect your data, your advert, your logo, and it'll put it on its website automatically. Now, how they make money, well, there's a few ways they make money, but how they'll make money from you is that if you want to boost that advert, you put a campaign behind it. So you allocate a certain amount of money, and then it will boost your advert up the ranks so that you appear at the top of their search. So your job will be on their job board. It'd just be 10 pages at the back. No one really sees it.
Whereas that's like Google rankings. That's good. Google.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly like that, and it will use a not too dissimilar kind of algorithm to do it. And obviously, the more money you pump into it, the higher up you go. And then you'll have an account manager for Indeed as well, so they'll be able to advise you how much money will get you where with your advert. So that's Indeed. Now, LinkedIn is not too dissimilar now, actually. So LinkedIn, I think it was a year or two ago, you can post, I think, 2 jobs on LinkedIn for free now. However, it works in a similar way where your job will be on LinkedIn, but then you need to invest money, so it bumps up. And then if you want to post any more than a job or 2 on there, you'll need to get a proper recruiter license, and you have an account manager that will manage your budgets for you. But I think for me, depending on the role that you're looking for, when it comes to kind of looking at active candidates that are in the market, LinkedIn is predominantly used for kind of skilled office workers, whereas Indeed is a bit of everything. But if you look at if we were to put it in it from a salary range perspective, from kind of 0 to anything up to 30 to 40K Indeed would work really well for, and then in LinkedIn is kind of the 30 to 40k upwards. It works really well for, I found personally in my experience.
Yeah,
and then Indeed, you obviously can go higher than that, and it works well. And again, Total Jobs, Read, they kind of work across the board really. And then there's something I haven't actually spoken about, which is your niche job website. So you'll find that different industries and different sectors will have a website that's dedicated to that niche. And if you have a certain niche, it might be that website works really well for you. So an example might be charity jobs. So if you are in the charity sector, and actually that's your driver, you are in that sector because that's what you're passionate about, giving back and doing all that, you will naturally just gravitate towards that job board. So that's where you'll find those types of candidates. And the same goes for nursing. I talk about nursing because that's the sector I'm currently in. There are a number of nursing job boards out there where naturally nurses will gravitate towards, because they know that the only job that they will see on there is the job that they want to apply for.
It's relevant.
So that's job boards. But I think the key thing to bear in mind with job boards is that you're only going to be attracting the 30% of the active candidate market. So if you take the market as a whole, 100%, at any given, so I think it was LinkedIn did a piece of work a few years ago where they looked at the whole market, and around 30% of the market at any given time would be actively looking for a job. So they would be out there looking at adverts, applying. And then you've got that 70% that are passive, that are currently in their job, happy in their job. However, they might turn their head if someone approached them and said, look, we've got a job for you. It's closer to home, or you'd be earning a bit more money, or whatever it might be. So that, for me, is an untapped area that not many people really tap into and utilize. And it's usually the area of the market that is kind of left exclusively for headhunters.
And that's where they get their value. But I guess you can see those are often at higher cost roles, or I guess where people are sort of cherry picking, or sort of poaching. But in the areas where in smaller businesses, and certainly our experience, we've had quite a decent experience from LinkedIn, but the job boards, the challenge has been actually sifting, because there's a lot of dross. And so I suppose just very briefly, before we're going to just go on to finish off with interviewing and onboarding, any top tips for sifting? I mean, I suppose I thought myself, having clarity on the job role from the start, starting with that helps a lot as to what questions you ask. But what would you say in terms of sifting if you did get a lot of, candidates?
Yeah, so there's I think there's two things for me. Both of them are relatively similar. The first one is creating killer questions, which you should be able to do through your applicant tracking system, but you can also do them on the various job boards. So they will be any question like, do you have a minimum of 3 years experience as a dialysis nurse, or customer service assistant in the telecom sector, or whatever it might be. Anyone that says no to that, they'll automatically get cut from the process. And then you can create a number of killer questions that just completely remove any candidate that is not going to be suitable. And another question might be, are you comfortable commuting 2 days into this location? Sometimes people will say yes to all the questions, but other times they actually work and they do sift. So that's one way to support with that shortlisting process. And another way is, so it's a really cool piece of technology that I'm currently in the process myself of creating, which allows the interviewer or the business to talk to the candidate and say, thank you so much for applying for this role. There's a few questions that we'd like to ask you. And then the candidate can interact back with that live video to then respond. So it allows the candidate to actually see some from the business and hear someone's voice from the business and see them, and then respond either in video form, audio form, or text form to a number of questions, which will allow the person shortlisting to better shortlist against the role.
That's sort of almost pre-interviewing, so that's really good, again, saving time of your interviewers, but you're getting that sort of real person sift. My daughter's just applying for a placement, and she's just had to do that in there. So it's interesting, using technology again.
It's great as well, because it might be an initial time outlay for you to actually set the video up. But if you're recruiting, 5 or 10 of the same role, that initial time investment is saved, 10, 20 times over from the amount of time that it would take you to interview.
Yes.
So if just for an interview, it's going to take the business an hour and a half just to do one interview. Because if you think the amount of time it takes to actually coordinate timings, it's around half an hour's worth of work to and from the candidate to get it set up.
And it's asynchronous as well, isn't it? So you don't have to block out time in peak time of day either. So you could review those videos in quieter hours. So I can see that's valuable. Well, and
you can use tech as well, like Calendly as well, to get those diary invites set up as well. And if you use technology cleverly, there's so many corners that you can cut, and time and little time savings that you can make, which will make a big difference when it comes to processing candidates as well.
I was going to say, what I might ask you to do, Miles, is post the post call, because I'm sure you don't want to sort of over recognise others. If you have any top bits of tech or otherwise, or recommendations, let me know, and perhaps I can put them in the show notes, or we could post them out. Maybe when we post the episode out, you can put some links to ones that you do recommend for people, because it is often great to have a sort of, you've got such comprehensive understanding and insight, and we keep tapping into little bits here where the tech could be helpful, that I imagine people would probably want to follow up and get access to your expertise. I think in the interest of time, we'll stop there. We know that you need to then go on and interview properly face to face, and probably have standard interview questions. And actually, if you look in our HR Uprising catalogue, we've done quite a lot on specific interviews and things like that, and onboarding as a topic. So that would be your closing point. But Miles, if people want to work with you, because that has been so interesting and so packed with content, let's just summarise what we've gone through. We've talked about having a solid foundation, really understanding what you're looking for, being real about the company culture, what it is you're looking to recruit, and not pretending as to what it is to get the right fit for the person. And that's going to go right back to when you're sifting. You need to know what you're looking for in the first place. Think about your future and current talent needs from business. Consider your employee value proposition in terms of your adverts, your website, the whole process, D&I. We talked about some really insightful insight into ATS's, applicant tracking systems, and how you can use those better. Investing that time in those and setting them up effectively can pay back huge in dividends. And I really felt that technology was starting to come through more and more in terms of job boards and interviews, in terms of that pre-interview, to get those right candidates through, but all the while making sure that you are managing your brand so that you set things out so people are not ghosted, because it's so important to have a sort of an eye and an ear on that for your future employees. So Miles, if people want to speak to you directly and follow up with you and ask you questions, etc., or get your recommendations, how would they find you?
Best bet for me is LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn, so you can find me linkedin.com/Miles Bonnell, all one word. Or you can pop me an email. So my email is miles@milohr.com.
That's a nice easy one. And it's Bonnell, Bonnell. And obviously we'll put these links in the show notes as well. Miles, thank you very much. That was a really insightful recording. So I appreciate your time today.
No, thank you very much for having me.
I really hope you found this week's episode useful and enjoyable. If you did, perhaps you could recommend us to a friend or colleague, or give us a review on your platform of choice. It really helps new listeners to find us. Now you can access links to any of the information mentioned in this show via the website www.hruprising.com. Further free resources are also available at www.actus.co.uk. There you can also find out more about our software and training solutions. Finally, why not join our LinkedIn group, the HR Uprising, to share ideas and collaborate with other like-minded people professionals. Thank you for listening to the HR Uprising podcast.